Welcome, welcome. It is, what is the date today? July 30th. It's about to be July 31st, the end of the month, 2020. And this is the NLP Tribe Call, where we provide just a weekly calls related to the content and practice of NLP, primarily focusing on our practitioner workbook. So thank you for everyone who's here. Mia, Joe, really appreciate you participating and jumping on. And for all of those people who will be watching at a future time, thanks for staying involved and keeping up with your skill set as it relates to what you've learned in the practitioner course. So for those of you who have kept up, Mia and I have been doing these presentations based again on the practitioner workbook, and we've slowly been moving through all the modules in that workbook. And what we've been focusing on the last few weeks is Milton Erickson. So what I've decided to do today was really recap the presentation that I gave a couple of weeks ago for two reasons. One is because we covered the primary points of Milton Erickson, right, and the language models. But since then, I think we've had an opportunity to really dig deeper and expand on it. So I want to expand on that last the presentation from a couple of weeks ago, and just have a discussion about it, right? So this is more along the lines of clarifying any questions for anyone, as well as providing some additional insight and depth to Milton Erickson and the work that the Milton model does, right? And then the comparisons. How does that sound, Mia? What do you think? Do you think there's anything else that we should be talking about or adding?
Definitely, I would just follow up with what you said, and say that we also had the opportunity to go through the NLP Master course. Very powerful course, very more deeper. Let's dig deeper. Here is more tools for you to use. Here are the more techniques. Here is your revelation, in a way, almost given in the plate, but of course it needs your participation and your determination to actually do something. But definitely we got a deeper peek into Milton, and I think this is a great recaption of Milton, because we had a couple of days to have that knowledge sit down with us, like for us to integrate. And now I think we're fully confident to expand and get deeper and get better in our explanations, or trying to at least give you better examples for you guys to utilize. So definitely.
Yeah, and I echo that. So it's a fine line, right? It's a delicate line that we walk, right? Because in your practitioner workbooks, you have a wealth of information, and now as I've gone through the master, and we've almost completed the master practitioner certification, and looking back at our original workbook, there's so much there that you can capitalize on. And it really is just a matter of review. And I say this almost on all of these calls, right? It's learn, do, teach, and the more that you do that, the more that you absorb all of this content. And in doing that, what happens is you become familiar with one particular technique or one particular component of a model or one pattern. And then once you familiarize yourself and you've internalized that to where it's subconscious, you can take the next step and move on to the next pattern or the next component or the next technique. And slowly what happens over time is you begin to internalize all of the entire kind of technology that is NLP. And in doing so, it has these amazing benefits in your communication, your perception, your interaction, your well-formed outcomes as far as how you want things to unfold. And you really have this kind of this secret weapon to influence that. So Milton for me has always been this. Initially, I thought of it as almost this esoteric, right? This idea of somehow you can perform magic in the way that you communicate with people, and in performing that magic, you can help them and help yourself and get to this mutual well-formed outcome for the both of you, right? This mutually beneficial outcome. And Milton was a master at that, right? His whole entire life was committed to kind of healing people from traumas, from Tourette's, from illnesses. He healed himself from illnesses based on the power of his mind, right? The power of consciousness. So it really walks this fine line of kind of this energetic interaction that we have with people, right? And the observation, the capability of what observation can really tell you about other people, and then being able to leverage language to influence change. And Mia, maybe you'll agree with me, but one of the things that I've learned over the course of this master certification is having the flexibility. When we say flexibility in NLP, it really means this idea of becoming so familiar with each of these components of NLP that on the fly you can customize the way that you respond to people. And I'll say this, with time, you absolutely can master what is NLP. It just, the only requirement is that you implement it, right? You study, you decide to implement whatever it is that you've studied, you practice, and then you repeat. There's in your book, you'll see something that's called the TOTE model. And the TOTE model is really trigger, operate, test, exit, or test, operate, test, exit. And what it is, it's a model of you being able to go through the process of the things that you learn, test if they work, you go through the operation part of it, right? So you're actually operating in that particular model, whether it's a pattern or whatever it is, then you test to see if the outcome was there, and then you exit and rinse and repeat. So it's just this idea of being able to continuously apply what it is that we've learned. In doing that with time, your skill will increase. Your perceptive capabilities, your capabilities of observation will increase. The expansion of the way that you use language will increase with time. So I encourage each and every one of you, watch these videos, right? Join these calls. These things, there's no other organization on the planet that I know of that is doing this, what we're doing now. Usually when, people are coming to groups like this, they're paying thousands and thousands of dollars, right, to discuss this information, to learn this information, to have exercises given or interactive exercises where we're working together to do things like that. So please, please, please leverage this stuff. This is, the vision of, Brigitte and Christian and, Mia and myself and others who wanted to have a community where we could all get together and really excel and grow in the skill set, right? In the techniques and the patterns. You want to add anything, Mia?
Yeah, I just want to add. So I first want to add for the TOTE, basically the TOTE in a terms, it's like a good beginning of, or part of how you're successful at some strategy. So as Joshua said, so I'm going to use analogy of a bicycle. When you started to learn bicycle, you were learning the bicycle with the helping wheels. But once you got the operation of the bicycle going, and you can feel how the bicycle feels and everything, you were able to take one wheel and then take the other wheel and be completely masterful in riding a bike. So in a way, I just want to say that's connected in a way in a strategy. So you try different options, and the one that works the best for you, you're sticking to it. So I would invite you, encourage you to think about the strategy that you are masterful at, and share with us in the comments or message us. I really want to know, like, what is the strategy you're master at? Like, what do you want to share? Because we want to share what am I master at. So maybe you can pick up some of my tricks and hacks and you can apply it in your own unique way, and you can become even better than me in those strategies. So definitely I want to invite you to do that. And secondly, as Joshua said, this is a unique opportunity to join. We are building a tribe, but what I want to add, we are basically a master group, like a mastery, like how they have those master millionaire minds or whatever cool groups. We're like that, but we are more closer. I call, that's why I called it tribe. That's why I wanted to call it a tribe. We're millionaires. We are actually not millionaires. We're not even close to being millionaires. We're billionaires. We're infinity and beyond in terms of the enrichment we get through these calls, and basically knowing each other and helping each other and supporting each other. So that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, that's good, right? So the you know, at the core of it, right? We love our tribe. We love everyone who's participated, who contributes. We want the absolute best for each and every one of us, and you know, this process of learning and growth is what gets us there. I want to say something before I jump in into the presentation. So something that I've run into, and I'm sure many of us have run into in the past, is this idea of self-created obstacles, right? And I want to make sure that everyone knows that we're all on our own individual path, and we're all going to run into hurdles. It's just the nature of life, right? Where, you know, we have kind of our own kind of internal beliefs related to what exactly it is that we're capable of and what exactly it is that we're not capable of. And I want kind of to express that, you know, a fundamental component of NLP is being able to overcome that by establishing, you know, well-formed outcomes, by establishing, you know, a paradigm shift and a perspective change related to how you interpret those beliefs and how they impact you from, you know, your principles and your actions and your behaviors and the outcomes of those kind of perceptions. So know that you have kind of the tools within your toolkit to overcome those things. And the process is learning, right? It's just a learning process. So you never fail. You just you either win or you learn, right? And so I wanted to revisit that. But that being said, let's go and let's do this thing. So this is the same presentation, and we're gonna go deeper into the presentation, and we're gonna talk a little bit faster about through what the Milton model is and how it relates to NLP. So the Milton model. Here we go. The best way to explain this is there are, and I mentioned this in the presentation, there's really two language models that are the primary components of NLP. One's the meta model, and the other's the Milton model. So as we explained a couple weeks ago, the meta model and last week as well, the meta model really is to move from deep structure to surface structure. And what I mean by that is it's the idea of using the meta model is to get very, very specific related to a point of communication with another person. So the example would be someone's feeling pain. You would ask that person, well, where are you feeling pain? And they might tell you it's in my knee. And then you would ask, well, do you know how intense is the pain? And they'll say, well, it's a 5. Then you can say, well, do you know how it happened? And they might say, you know, I fell. And then you would say, well, when you fell, did you hit your knee on something? So this, what I'm trying to illustrate is that using the meta model, what you're doing is you're eliciting more information out of the individual so you can get to the specificity that you want related to understanding their map of the world, their perception of their experience. In using this technique, the idea is really to be able to get down to the core issue of what it is that's bothering this person or hurting this person, and then being able to apply other NLP techniques to give them a different perspective on how they interpret that information. That in turn really is kind of the key of of helping someone kind of overcome a challenge, or helping someone, get past a self-limiting belief, right? It's really that process of gaining the specificity of what it is that they're trying to tell you. In doing that, what you're doing is that you're exposing the truth and the principles and the beliefs of this person. The Milton model it's basically in contrast to that, right? Instead of extracting information like we do with the meta model, the Milton model is really about you utilizing ambiguous language so that you can bypass, right, the conscientious perception, the frontal cortex of the brain, for the most part, right, where they're very consciously aware of what's happening. You can actually confuse that part of their mind and bypass that, and then allow suggestive language to help them overcome those issues that you've discovered by using the meta, right? So when we think about Milton, he was really an absolute savant in the way that he communicated with people. So for us, it's really important to understand that all of the principles and the foundational work that we did, developing rapport, eye accessing cues, right? Understanding physiological body language, tonality, right? The tone of speech, the rate of speech, being able to align with that other person is a prerequisite in order to develop enough connection with them so that you can actually gain access to these other components of their understanding, of their interpretation, of their mind, of their map. So it's important to understand that we build on top of what we've learned before. And getting to Milton, if you don't have some type of practice or some type of kind of established confidence in those other areas, then I urge you, go back, practice those things, practice them on your family, practice them with your children, practice them with whoever, so that you can get comfortable on, one, understanding their primary representation system. How is it that they interpret information? Two, familiarize yourself with their behaviors, their eye accessing cues, right? Their posture, how they feel when they're happy, what they look like when they're sad. All of these aspects of communication that are associated with the person physically are really important to understand whether or not the language that you're using is actually working towards the outcome that you want, okay? So it's important to understand that foundational work is truly foundational, and you can't just skip over it. You really have to understand it in order to apply this well. I've said a lot. So Mia or Joe, any questions on what I've said so far?
No questions for me.
No questions? Okay, cool. So, I might have you pinned. Let's see if I can unpin you. Unpinned. Beautiful. So, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, the Milton model is really a set of language patterns that was modeled by, Richard Bandler and Grinder for hypnotic purposes. I'll say that Milton really didn't know. He knew what he was doing, but he didn't know in the terms of the way that NLP utilized linguistics to analyze what he was doing, right? So NLP has really taken what Milton did and put some context around it so that we can understand and learn how it's used. He was the grandfather of hypnosis, and he used this hypnotic language. And sometimes, and even, well, I'll say this, even after, Milton's death and NLP began to establish itself, what we learned was that in many cases, you don't need a trance state and you don't need a hypnotic state in order to use the suggestive language. You can do it, and you can make those suggestions to an individual and they actually receive them without having, this fully kind of in a fully involved hypnotic trance or trance within the person. So I will say that, although it's really important to practice those components, right? It's really important to understand how those components of NLP work. But what basically it did is it provided, the structures for forming suggestive language, right? That's what the Milton model does. So there's this concept of chunking up and chunking down, and that's in your NLP workbook. And what chunking up and chunking down means is there's a spectrum, right? There's basically this polarity that exists where if we go down that spectrum, we get really, really granular and really, really specific. And that's what's called meta. if we go up that spectrum, we get really, really broad, really, really ambiguous, or really, really kind of just very, very broad. And that's called, it's meta and macro. Macro and meta is what it is. But the Milton model and the meta model are the two ends of the spectrum. And because Erickson was so good at being ambiguous with these language patterns that we're going to review here in just a moment, he was really just capable of changing a person's perspective on a belief that they had almost instantaneously. And with practice, we can get really, really good at doing this. And not only for our own internal development, but for the assistance, right, and the benefit of other people around us who might have challenges and might have problems. So again, I said it a couple of weeks ago, these two components of NLP are critical, right? These two language models, right, are really a fundamental component of being able to utilize NLP at a master level. So there we go. I talked about a little bit about these examples of key language patterns, and we're going to go over the same presentation. We're going to dig deeper, and we're going to provide some clarity around what these language patterns are intended to do.
Before we go into that, can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, fire away. That's what we're here for.
So then on the Milton model, using the example of the knee, the gentleman hitting his knee,
sure.
What would be an example of the Milton model using the knee situation?
So it depends on what we're trying to accomplish, right? If we're trying to accomplish, let's say he fell and hit his knee and he's feeling pain, right? With the Milton, with the meta, we got down to the idea that he fell, he hit his knee, and it's hurting him, right? What we can do in turn is go up and chunk up after we've found out what that is and say something to the effect of, I remember at some point in time that I fell and hit my knee. And in falling and hitting my knee, if you think about that, it didn't have as much of an impact from a pain perspective as I thought it did initially. And maybe you too can imagine at some point in time where you're no longer feeling pain because you fell and now you're relaxed and feeling really, really calm, and you've noticed that the pain's dissipated. And
so you could also, for example, like then if you know that he was an athlete, for example, right, and
sure.
say, hey, well, yeah, those of us that used to be athletes and whatever, and he hit himself, he's in pain, but you pretty much have an idea that he didn't tear his ACL or anything like that.
Exactly.
So like, hey man, come on, we've been through this before, and you're gonna be fine, man. I mean, hey, you got that strong,
right.
You've been
right.
athlete, so you're kind of painting just a broad picture, and you're almost talking them into wellness by saying, hey, we were stud athletes in the past, and yeah, it's gonna hurt a little bit longer than when we were younger, but hey man, you still got that fiber in there, you got that fiber, hey, you're gonna be fine, man, don't worry about it, let's go. That could
be an outcome. That can absolutely be an outcome. Milton could take it as far as, and you can take that as deep and as far as you want to. It could be something you could, and this is incongruent, right? But you could have him focus his consciousness on the pain associated with the knee, right? And maybe try to explore how bad it really hurts, right? So it really depends on where you want to go. But the idea behind it is that what you've done now is, as I was telling you that story, right? Instead of his consciousness being focused on the pain that was in his knee, what happened was his consciousness got distracted and started going to the story about other athletes who might have fallen in the past, right? And you start to incorporate that language that removes his attention from the immediate problem that he's feeling. And then with practice, you'll have a strategy related to how to either divert that, how to either distort it for him or generalize it in a different way so that his concept of a hurt knee doesn't necessarily have the same end result of what he was feeling whenever he came to you with the problem. So that's kind of a high level explanation of what the Milton language will help you do. It'll go ahead.
Sorry, just want to make sure, if we are to use any Milton model, we need absolutely to be in rapport with the person. If we're not in rapport, like I'm pissed, it hurts. And you're like, hey, it's gonna be okay. I'm gonna be just smacking you out. Like, get out of my face, leave me alone. So we have to be in rapport before we start to give a suggestive language. And also perfect examples are kids. I mean, both of you have kids, and how many times your kid fell and the kid is confused because they fell and they're looking for the reaction of the parents. So you have those parents that go paranoid. Oh my God, you fell, come on. And the kid starts crying. Then you have the parents that go like, oh, look at the sky, and you're distracting the mind. And the kid is confused. They even forgot that they just fell a second ago.
That's right.
And they're just continuing like, okay, let me just dust it off and continue my way. So basically, we have a lot of patterns that are embedded into us as when we were little, but as well, a lot of times we can use kids as a perfect example of playing with their, in a way, I wouldn't say playing, but being masterful in confusing their mind in order to get them to the point where we want them to get them, like sleeping, your strategies to putting kids to sleep, your strategies in getting your kids to study, your strategies, like even you, Joe, your strategy in getting your son to throw the garbage. Like, you guys have it. You guys are using it. Just
right.
It has to go onto surface. We're trying to get that on surface. We're trying to pinpoint in a way.
That's great. That's really good. And it's true, right? A lot of this happens subconsciously. What Erickson did and what he provided the example of was really to fully illustrate how to go about doing it from a hypnotic and trance perspective. And that's where this idea of, communication is words, tonality, and body language, right? It really, and this is really important to stress to everyone. It's like those three things, right? The rate of speech, when we talk about rapport, right? Aligning to somebody's posture, aligning to somebody's tone, aligning to somebody's rate of speech, all of these things what encourage a stronger connection between the two individuals. And in that stronger connection, you notice that you have more eye contact. You notice that you have a stronger emotional kinesthetic connection to that person in that conversation. When you feel those components of that connection, of that rapport, at that point, you know that they're very, very focused. They're very, very focused on what it is that you're saying to them. And in turn, you're very, very cognizant and aware of what it is that you're receiving. It's finding the magic and being able to make that connection. That's the foundational work before you can start saying things like, chunking laterally, right? Which means, using an example or using an NLP pattern or using, some other form of language to help with resolving, the issue or getting the outcome that you wanted. So I say that in the sense that, again, the foundational work that we've practiced, right? The eye accessing cues, the tonality, right? The rapport building, all of those things. Work on those things, become comfortable with those things, practice those things with, your family. The more that you practice it, the more that you're going to remember their specific map of the world, how they interpret information, how they receive information. And once you have that, then you're so much better and so much better equipped to be able to communicate with them in a way that they understand you. And in doing so, you start to become a master communicator. You start to become a neuro-linguistic programming master. So that's all really, really good stuff. And it's a really, really good question. I hope that it answered kind of the high level of what you were looking to get out of it. as you study Milton more, you'll understand that it becomes much, much broader than just this idea of direction. It also, relates to how we change submodalities within a person subconsciously so they're not responding to external stimulus in a destructive way. There's a story, and I'll tell you guys. So he was a therapist, and he got asked to help cure this lady who was displaying symptoms of Tourette's at the time. And she was going off on Jesus sexually. Like everything was related to these kind of vulgar sexual interactions using Jesus. So Milton he went to her and he aligned with her, and using all of the proper kind of hypnotic or trance state techniques with her, he exercised them using the same, and this is the importance of rapport, using the same language that she was using, which actually shocked her. So no one could get through to this lady. This lady was just going off with Tourette's, cussing sexually about Jesus. Milton Erickson came to her, listened to her for a few minutes, modeled her physiology, and then immediately fed her back everything that she was saying, so much to the point where she was shocked into being quiet. And then as he said that, he then started to make suggestions related to how she could deal with the issue and not be so overly overt, right? Overt in how she was dealing with this Tourette's issue. So one was he aligned to this idea that perhaps there was a reason why she needed to do that. So finding a separate ecological option, he said, maybe you don't need to scream it. Maybe you can say it to yourself in your head or whisper it to yourself softly, right? And then he used other things like at once a week, I want you to practice once a week going into the garage, turning on the music as loud as you possibly can and letting it all out. So he would find these ways and these creative ways to give people other options to express, maybe in this case, a mental illness without it being so kind of obnoxious and absurd in the face of other people, right? In the face of, in the face of others that were around her. So the story ended that a couple of years later, after she had practiced all of this stuff, she was completely cured of Tourette's. Never had to take a drug, never had to take any, pharmaceuticals. He basically cured a woman of Tourette's by giving her mental strategies and changing her paradigms as it related to how she was expressing this need related to the Tourette syndrome. So that gives you kind of an example of how it can be used. Go ahead, Mia.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that gives a perfect picture of how masterful he was actually in establishing the rapport, pace, space, lead. Because what Joshua just said is a story about sitting down and observing. So establishing the rapport. And in terms of establishing rapport, he's pacing her by now he's cursing.
Yep, he was being the mirror.
He's being the mirror and literally leading, because now her mind is confused and open for suggestions.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So it's critical, like Mia's saying, it is critical to be able to understand how that rapport is developed and how that rapport is built. And all of us, all of the practitioners know how to do that. That was foundational work in our practitioner certification. It's just a matter of whether or not we're practicing it. So I would urge you, practice that, practice that, practice that. Go back, look at the eye accessing cues. Go back, listen to some of the language that you have for yourself, as well as some that you hear in your interactions with your loved ones or your immediate circle, and start to practice understanding what's happening in the way that people communicate with you. Pay attention to the way that they speak. Pay attention to the tone. Pay attention to their rate of speech. Pay attention to their physiology. Start watching those things and try to see how well you can align to it, right? Try to see how well you can not necessarily mimic, but align to it so that I promise you, once you do this, you'll start to notice that you have a stronger connection with people whenever you're communicating with them. They'll be more likely to interact with you. They'll be more likely to share with you, because they find similarities, right? We find this common ground. And that's really the foundational work of developing strong relationships with people, is having common ground and common interests and common, outcomes related to how you view the world. The more that you can align to someone's map of the world, the more power you have in influencing that map of the world. Okay. So
you do want to relate to someone.
yeah,
Make sure you use word relate. I can relate to that event, but avoid using understand. It gives different heaviness, especially if people went through if that event really made a really big impact. Sometimes people can be very offensive and build a wall if you guys go ahead and say, oh, I can understand you. No, you cannot. You don't know how it feels. You don't know like this. You don't know, like, especially females. Like, I mean, I'm female, so I can. If I choose to be like that, I can be. And I mean, guys too. Sometimes, if we're just, that's why we want to be conscious in using the word better. Relate. I can relate, because maybe our stories sound same, but they're never the same. They're similar because different actors, different time, different impact, different emotions, and everything.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. We can never really truly see the other person's map of the world. We can just try to relate to it as much as possible. So that's correct. So let's go over these quick patterns, some of these examples of patterns for the Milton model, and we'll talk a little bit about them. So casual connections, they're basically, it's somewhat of an embedded command where we're connecting two things that might not necessarily have a related kind of symbiotic relationship, but we're connecting them, and the outcome is driven towards kind of a response that we want, right? So there's some examples here where as you blink your eyes, you'll begin to feel sleepy, and these examples here are really related to a trance state, right? Establishing a trance state. Now, I'll say this. Casual connections don't have to be just a trance state, right? We can use, casual connections to do anything. For example, if we want to help, somebody, this is an example for you, Joe. We want to help, create more coordination in a person, right? We might say, hey, every time your feet, touch the ground, that your hands are coming to your side, or whatever it might be related to, a jumping jack or something like that. Casual connections can be used for eliciting joy in an individual when they're doing something that they might not necessarily enjoy. Someone doesn't like washing the dishes. You can make the casual connection, subconsciously. Every time I wash the dishes, I get happy because I think of my favorite song, or, I think of, a time when I was, with my, mom or something, and we were washing the dishes together, and it was just a great memory. So they don't necessarily have to be related to this idea of trance. Now, practicing the trance statements are good because you're learning the induction and the hypnotic language, but know that it doesn't stop there. Casual connections can be made to induce that state of trance, but also to begin to induce these perspective changes within the person. So presuppositions. This one's really, really interesting to me. I would recommend that all of you go back through the workbook and look at presuppositions, familiarize yourself with presuppositions. They are extremely powerful, right? And they're a fundamental component of the Milton model and hypnotic language. But they're basically these ideas where you already presuppose a behavior of some sort in another person. And what you do is it's somewhat almost in a way an embedded command, because you're already presupposing that an outcome is going to happen. And in some instances, you might give a person a choice. When we talked about it last week, it was this idea of doing the presupposed close, right? And using a timeline with it. Hey, do you want us to start on, Monday, or do you want us to start on Wednesday? Which one's going to work best for you? So
what is the name of your son, Joe? Sorry.
Anson. Anson.
Anson. So it's same as you saying Anson. Do you want to throw the trash before dinner or after the dinner?
Right. Yeah, you have a choice, and it is somewhat influential, right? In the sense that language bypasses their conscientious reasoning to be able to negate what it is that you say, right? Because the mind immediately is going to go, well, I've got one of two choices. Now, they might be strong enough and come back and say, hey, no, I don't want to do either, right? You're going to run into that. But the idea is, the way that Erickson used it was he stacked presuppositions, and they became such a continuous flow of presuppositions that it really confused the mind, and it confused a person's ability to really completely interpret what was being said to him. And again, these ideas of ambiguity in communication, those are the things that open up, that bypass that frontal cortex, right? That conscientious interaction, and immediately go to opening access to the subconscious of that individual. So presuppositions are a powerful way to do that, if you understand how to say them and you understand how to stack them continuously in your language. So that's presuppositions. Embedded command. So this is a good one too, right? I mean, I like this, and some people, are very familiar with it. If you're not, just take your time and practice it, right? An embedded command can be ambiguous through a couple of things that we'll talk about, the ambiguity components of this. But the idea is that you're asking them or advising them to do something underneath the guise of potentially not doing it or doing something different. So in here, it says there's really no need to. And that's the first part. So the second part is close your eyes as you continue to breathe even more deeply. It's important to understand that in the way that Milton used this language, tonality and the rate of speech were important, right? They were important components of how he delivered these messages. So that's really the embedded command. And Mia, do you mind for just one moment talking a little bit more about this? I've got to step away for just 1 second.
Of course. So with the embedded command, as Joshua said, we are giving, literally, as the word says, we're giving a command to a person what we want them to do. So by that, again, we're pacing them and then leading them by embedding the command. So as this example that Joshua has, there is no need to close your eyes as you continue to breathe even more deeply. What is interesting is putting also no need or negative, which doesn't actually confuse the brain. It doesn't look like it's gonna confuse the brain. The thing is, the brain doesn't hear no. The brain hears need to close your eyes.
Yeah.
Or when I say, do not listen to me, you're gonna be, I'm gonna listen to you.
Right.
Who are you to tell me not to?
That's one aspect. And then the other aspect is how you deliver do not listen to me, right? Is it do not listen to me, or is it do not listen to me, right? So those small fluctuations in the way that we deliver our language really confuse the way that people interpret what it is that we say, right? This is Milton's getting to this idea of really taking ownership for the way that we communicate. one of the principles of NLP is that, the intention of communication is how it's received, not how it's delivered. And as we start to study this, we understand that, that really is within our control. If we start manipulating tonality and we start, leveraging kind of the rate of speech and our physiology and how expressive we are when we're interacting with other people, we really start to take command of our ability to control our communication. And in taking control of that communication, we can see and we can test how well it's being received on the other end of that experience of communication. Thank you, Mia, for that. So metaphors. So metaphor is really this idea of lateral chunking to me, right? And it's this, if you notice the great speakers, right, great public speakers or great motivational speakers, they always have these stories or they have these examples that are ways of communicating with someone that give them the possibility of stepping outside of their own frame of reference and seeing how another person or something else may have handled that experience. So in doing so, what we can leverage is the ability to make a suggestion, but not directly impact that person because they might have some sort of, personal issue related to being told how to handle that situation. So a metaphor is a perfect example to help guide them towards that suggestion without impacting that personal issue that they have related to how they receive the information. So in here, the example is, they were talking to some little girl and asking her if she's ever heard a story of a princess who was angry with her parents until a bird flew into her window and sat on her shoulder and told her this. And telling her this, whatever that this is, right, is what you've already calibrated based on the conversation that you had with that young girl, right, and understanding why she's upset, right? So it's this idea of being able to use that metaphor so that you can submit that suggestion that gives her an alternative perspective on something that was bothering her before, right? And so metaphors act in that way. They're this kind of, they also do something from the perspective of credibility, right? So using a metaphor and a story of communication, perhaps saying, one time, my mentor, or one time an NLP grand master, right? Or, I remember this time when, a doctor or something, a higher authority or a credible authority, and then go into your story of how you want to submit that suggestion, also establishes a higher level of credibility within yourself, as well as related to the outcome of the suggestion that you want to make. So metaphors are a great way to leverage that credibility aspect as well. Any input there, Mia, or any questions, Joe, Mia?
No, you pretty much bluntly explained.
Yeah. So this is the reason why, again, I'm going to repeat this. The reason why we're going back over this is because, one, it's really important to internalize this stuff, right? So the more that you kind of repeat it, internalize it, the easier it's going to become for you to leverage and to think about. And that's what actually creates mastery, right? That's what creates kind of this idea of excellence in the way that we execute our communication. So yeah, if you guys have any questions or anything like that, make sure that you can write them in on the page or reach out to me or myself, and we'll be more than happy to continue to dig deep and dive into this thing for you. Okay.
I use stories all the time.
What's that?
I said I use stories all the time.
Yeah, you do. You do. You absolutely do. That's you have a very strong what's the word that I'm looking for? It's not aversion, but you've got a very strong position around storytelling, and it's a powerful thing. You already know that, right? You already know how powerful it is to tell a story, especially if it relates to a challenge that someone has, and that can actually be a hypnotic induction. Being able to, because what you've done is you've removed that person from them directly dealing with the issue, and you're taking them on a journey that somebody else had related to how they handle that issue. So absolutely hypnotic, suggestive language. Ambiguity. So this is where Milton became, I can't even really explain it, but it was magical and masterful to watch his utilization of ambiguity. It's so much so that you can watch some of Milton Erickson's videos on YouTube, where you can grab some of his movies and find yourself going into trance just by watching him putting someone else into trance, and putting someone else in this hypnotic, relaxed state. I would suggest that, everybody take a shot at it, right? I mean, and you don't have to do that. You can use this on yourself. So one of the things that Erickson did often was, because he believed the first interaction with a patient was the most powerful interaction, he would actually execute hypnotic suggestions to forget. He would actually, before a patient, an established patient would come in, he would activate this hypnotic pattern to forget that he'd met the person, and then start all over from the beginning fresh, because he would get more information. He was on another level. So he would use ambiguity on himself, hypnotic language and ambiguity on himself, in order to improve his ability to be, a therapist. So let's go over, the three kind of components of ambiguity. One is phonological ambiguity, and it's where words sound alike. Bear and bear. One's an animal, one is being bare, not having anything, right? Rest and rest. Rest as, I'm going to get some rest, and there's the other rest as it's the rest of us who are doing some things. There's a whole slew of these phonological ambiguous words that can be placed into our language that can confuse the mind. And it's in that confusion, right? It's in that ambiguity where someone starts to question. You'll see them lean their head, and their eyebrows might go up, and you're like, oh. And once you see that, you know that they're off to another place. And once they're off to the other place, that's when, you can either continue with more ambiguity and continue this idea of confusion, or you can actually, execute on kind of the intent of the communication. So that's phonological ambiguity. Syntactic ambiguity is where a word means more than one thing, right? So in this sense, they say touching memories can bring many new learnings, right? So there's this idea of something that's touching. It's a kinesthetic feeling that you have inside of yourself, or the actual physical representation of touching. And in this case, that might be an experience where you're setting an anchor, right? And so you might touch the person on their hand, or touch the person on their elbow, and say, touching memories can bring many new learnings. And in that, you emphasize whatever those memories are that you're trying to recall, if it's a positive state that you're trying to bring to a person, right? So it's this idea of layering these techniques on top of each other that starts to make all of this powerful. So that's syntactic ambiguity. Punctuation ambiguity is where you are combining two different kind of, not necessarily embedded commands, although they can be embedded commands, but two different components of your intent via a single word that overlaps both of those intentions within that communication. When I was a child, I used to dream of sailing the sea, that comforting image in your mind's eye now, right? And so in saying that, and the way that you deliver that is kind of this idea of, oh, wait a second, he used to sail, but he wants me to see, and it's layering these different components that starts to really, when you start practicing this, you'll start to see that the way that people respond to it. And I think, the experience has to be had in order for you to understand the true power. So I've said this before, I'll say it again. There's a movie on Amazon called The Wizard of the Desert, and it's based on Milton Erickson's life. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Everything that we're talking about here is displayed in that film, and they talk to it in more detail related to how, these concepts came about, the history, his experience, and how he really got to be, who he was, and the contribution that he made to therapy and hypnosis in general. Mia, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to add, it has amazing stories, like patient story, again, anecdotes that you can use in your storytelling, Joe. Like you can use Milton. You can talk about Milton.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And
Go ahead.
did you want to say something?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't. I thought you were finished. Go ahead.
Okay. No, just that like you can use anything. Like most of those stories are very some of them are funny, some of them are sad, some of them are really enlightening, and you can use any of them. And also there is a great book if we're gonna go about storytelling, wrote by Jorge Bucay, Let Me Tell You a Story. It's written, so Jorge Bucay is in real life a psychologist, a very masterful one. He wrote a book basically that has been like written in, like patient is telling the story of him going to Jorge to do the therapy. And the therapy is like everyday problems, like anybody can relate to any of those problems. Like friends don't understand me, my girlfriend is like this, then she doesn't understand me, or this or that, and I'm not happy where I am in school and work and da 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 da. So, and every time he comes with a problem, Jorge Bucay masterfully goes and tell him an anecdote. Let me tell you a story. And you have a million stories, little stories there embedded, and it's really, I just love how he did that book. I literally read that book in 2 days. That was how I couldn't leave it.
That's awesome.
Really.
That's awesome. I'm gonna read that. That's next on the list. Nonverbal markings. So it's this, it employs this idea of using physiology, using touch, using expression to emphasize and impact the way that you communicate, right? People can walk into the room and not say a word, and you already know so much about what they're feeling. You already know so much about what their mood is. So this idea of nonverbal markings can be utilized in that same way, where you can emphasize specific points of interest or specific points of suggestion whenever you're talking to someone. Many people have this skill. We talked about it a couple weeks ago, in that a lot of Latinos are very animated. Italians are very animated, right? In the way that they talk, and they use their hands, they use their body, they do all of these things that really emphasize the point of how they communicate. This not only is something to further express, right, and give more interest in what it is that you're saying, these things can also be used hypnotically. These things can also be used to make suggestions. They can be used to point at specific components of how you want people to respond to things. So this idea of mastering NLP, right, is kind of, it's intuitive. You have to be brave enough. Well, one, you have to be confident enough in what it is that you're learning. So study it. Study what you're learning. It'll make you better at life. It'll make you better at work. It'll make you better in your relationships. And then once you have that confidence that you understand, then you start to explore a little bit. You start to test the waters, and you start to do things differently. And through trial and error, you'll find what does work and what doesn't work. I'm fascinated by NLP, and that's why, I'm grateful for, the opportunity to do these things and share and learn. But for all of us who have practitioner certifications, and leverage this. This is powerful. I use it in my interviews. I use it in my communication with my family, with my loved ones, with my kids, and I teach that to them too, so that they understand the power that they have in their communication. So I think that's it. I usually do a video, but I didn't do a video today, because I thought that I would talk about something personal today. So I haven't. I'm going to share this with the tribe, because you guys are my tribe. So my grandmother passed away this morning at 6:30 p.m. and we kind of knew that she was on her way out. I went to go see her last weekend, and she was on hospice, and it was very, very fortunate. She experienced absolutely no pain. And it was powerful. So I may have told, I can't remember if I told this story or to whom I told this story, but it's a cool story, and I'll share it with you guys. So for a long time, my family has been so I've got quite a few aunts and uncles, and a few of them had been at odds with one another over the years for different reasons, right? There's all kinds of reasons why people can find, excuses not to get along or not to communicate. And because of that, there had been some rifts in between, my aunts and uncles, and, and all of this stuff. And the outcome of it was not anything. It wasn't loving, it wasn't loving. And so when I went down there, I kind of took ownership of the situation, and I called my family together and I said, hey, listen, we have to set aside our differences. I may have talked about this in a post. That's what I think I did. I may have talked about this in a post, but we have to set aside our differences. And, I understand that, people may be offended or people may be hurt for whatever reason, but the reality is that, right now what we need to do is come together as a family and be in support of one another, and support, our grandmother through this process. And what happened was, it was somewhat miraculous, because, people who hadn't talked for years, right, came together and started talking again, over this understanding that death has a tendency to really illustrate and highlight the importance of the experience, what's really important. And we can see through the fallacy of these small reasons why we get angry with one another, or we stop talking to one another, or we stop supporting one another. And in seeing that, I saw like this opportunity for growth and this opportunity for expansion, in that, people can heal, right? People can forgive. People can learn to accept. People can better empathize and sympathize and relate to one another when we really start to take a look at what's really important. And when we see that the people that we love are passing and we're running out of time with those people, then it really highlights the importance of how we show up in the world, and the type of contribution that we make to those relationships. So I say that as the inspirational message for today, in that we can get caught up in all of the minutia of life. We can get caught up in work. We can get caught up in money. We can get caught up in possessions. We can get caught up in relationships. There's so many reasons why we can forget about the importance and the truth of that true connection of love and compassion for family, for friends, for people who might be crying out for help but are too prideful to say that they need it, or for people who might be lost, right, and don't have a clue as to how to find themselves solving the problems of their life. And the contributions that we make to help improve people's lives, right, to help them find solutions, to help them, to help them be the best version of themselves that they can possibly be. When it's all said and done, those are the moments that matter, right? Those are the ones that you look back and you say to yourself, I wish I would have had more time. I wish I would have done that more. I wish I would have been a better example of that. So that's the message, right? Is that live in this idea of love. Understand that the time is limited. It's finite, and that we only have so many moments in life to be this beautiful expression and this idea of contribution and service and assistance and compassion and understanding. And more than ever, the world needs that. In my family, right? And I'm sure in many other families as well. So that is that's the motivational message for today. That's what we've got. Cool. So with that, if you have any questions, by all means, please, post them. We'll post this video on the Tribe page, and we really, really love you. I hope that you're taking care of yourself, your family. I hope that you're well, and we hope to see you on on the future calls. All right, you guys take care.